Peace, human families of the planet Earth. You are now tuned in live to Super Heru Radio. I am your host, Aseer the Duke of Tears, along with my co-host, Selena the Empress of 10,000 years, a little more, Prince of Tears, as well as all of you, my brother, side by side, all of the ancestors. Thank you for coming through once again and blessing us with your presence. May we commune in this space, and may it be as unnecessarily unpreventful as possible, and allow the message of love, truth, peace, freedom, justice, equality, blood, fire, spirit, gold, silver, and earth, let it all be brought where it needs to come from and go where it needs to be. So a lot of stuff, again, I always preface everything with that, because it's true, man, this thing is constantly moving. And every other day it seems like it's something else going down. Or bless the dead to all those 38 people who died in a tornado. But just as Marcus Garvey did tell us, look for me in the whirlwind. And these tornadoes are really going hard on what they refer to as Middle America. And if we look at the country as a body, then Middle America would be the midsection, which is ruled by Virgo. So it's a lot of hard earth-hitting energy right now coming through towards the planet as we move into, again, higher octaves of understanding, as well as we're coming right after this, well, actually it's coming up. There's a lunar eclipse coming up to always balance the solar one that happened further on in the month. So with that, we want to send thanks and praise and love and light to Brother. This coincides with the one that happened last week, again a week ago, or we should say 2 weeks ago. Yeah, that's what I said, the solar eclipse that happened before, and right before Mother's Day, and how these occurrences of air descending to Earth is showing you the level of credence that comes with understanding the ability for us to unify behind central ideas, and the fact that a lot of these things that we see as cohesively or incohesive or not necessarily random are actually issues where we are striving to unify around a certain idea, or at least try to understand what these ideas or these things that we have in our mind are, and where it's all going, and why structure is not necessarily a bad thing. As much as we are chaos magicians and deal with chaos magic and all of that, it's not necessarily a negative thing to have a balance of order to chaos, or chaos to order. Vibrationally, color-wise, this is seen as the ability of the mind or the body to unite around a central idea and carry that idea into fruition, whatever that fruition may be. Yet, again, unfortunately, we conspire to, by any means necessary, get what we need accomplished before a lot of times we help, because we have this thing within our community that doesn't allow us or we don't afford ourselves the ability of indifference when we're really supposed to be exhibiting that. You know, a lot of times people will give their wise words to a fool, you know what I mean, instead of trying to help somebody with wisdom, and then turn into a different type of fool, you know what I mean, by wasting time on whoever, based upon you feeling that they need to know this truth. But like we always say on the show, man, you can't always be worried about what other people are understanding as that. You got to understand what you need to understand for you first before you can help somebody else. And until we start to practice that, we'll always be playing catch up with one another. Hopefully, hoping that we'll all, in a sense, catch on to a vibe like we are all going to one day wake up, and it's just going to be so apparent to us, like at the end of school days and shit, and then we all just walk into the hereafter, and it's like, yeah, we're going to be different, we're going to be this and be that. And that's not really the case. That's the farthest thing from the reality of where we are as a people. And that's part of the things that's holding us back, you know what I'm saying? The ability to not really understand our present position, and the fact that it is truly by design and not by some random freak occurrence of coincidental life. Of you just being born melanated is the biggest problem that you'll have in this world, and that's not really the case. And that hasn't even been like that for as long as we think. Yet, when we base our time continuum on somebody else's structure, that's when you get into problems, because then you're justifying yourself by someone else's existence, and that is not going to help. So that's with that. One book people should get, I was checking out the other day, is a book called The Spirit of the Internet and the Speculations of the Evolution of Global Consciousness by a guy named Lawrence Haggerty. If you can, check that joint out. Very interesting read. But it also gets into the assumption and the reality that the Internet was here before we were. Because what we perceive as the Internet is actually an aspect, or the aspect, of the Akashic record that is functioning in a solar continuum. Before we can go and live in the sun, we have to understand and master the realm of Earth first. Because the sun is its own universe within its own self. Yet it is also an apparative universe that really coincides when you understand what sunlight and the angle of light really means to you as a Merkabic being. Yet, again, to get to that, all of that, we need to understand why and where we came from and why we're in the position that we're in right now. And a lot of it is afforded to the fact that we don't have a direct line of descendancy as to how we became dead people. But when I say dead people, I'm not talking to us as physical zombies. I'm speaking more in the civic sense. You understand? The civics of law is what is allowing these people to presume a form of colorable law on the world, and is then functioning as that. So because these words, when you get into things like that, you got to understand that there have been two different forms of government that have been running concurrently on this hemisphere for a long time. And that most of these governments that you perceive as South American governments and things like that, they are actually tenets and aspects of your actual government that no longer function in their direct capacity as they once had, due to the direct knowledge, wisdom, and culture being codified through the national or international agreement of what we will call Freemasonry. So this is why myself, I'm not so much an advocate of that more than I am of more science, and also would go farther to say that one came out of the other. And if we want to exist in the capacity that we need to be recognized as nobles openly, not nobles secretly. So it's okay. So in other words, it's okay to be a noble in a manner where you're just around a bunch of other people that are going to deal with that, and you in no way, shape, or form trying to use that direct knowledge to benefit your people, your society, your culture, your God. That is a deep problem, man. A very deep problem that cannot be solved with rhetoric, with useless ideology and nationalities that have no direct correspondencies to some sort of government, tangible government that you yourself can identify with or even initiate. You know what I mean? So as we know, life, love, and the pursuit of happiness is the American way. Love, truth, peace, freedom, justice, equality is the Moorish American way. But Moorish America, we know, is anywhere a Moorish American exists on the planet. Therefore, you are not local and not domesticated to one form of citizenry. Yet your main form of citizenry happens to identify with your national character, which allows for a unification to exist between the real you and the fake you. But as I'm understanding it now, if we really are objective in looking at history as it's supposed to be looked at, when we talk about the term emancipate, coming from the colloquialism of the word emancipato, which most people erroneously mistake for freedom. Actuality, freedom is the farthest thing from emancipation. Emancipation strictly means transfer of ownership. Therefore, if that's the case, then at the time of the so-called independence, the United States itself, which was not a country, did not exist. Therefore, if that is the case, then, and let's say there was a government that existed before them, then the slavery that they were under essentially is a slavery that they revolved to put you back under, or to put you under. All of this, again, due to the reluctancy of the original people to understand the psychology of the children of Yaqub. Yet, because we as original people don't understand the true science of that, we are looking beyond the obvious. And the obvious is that when we speak of chosen people, or when we speak of these 12 tribes, we're speaking of these 12 tribes that walked out or came out originally of the triple stage darkness over 66 trillion years ago and went through the process that Elijah Muhammad referred to as great granddaddy Shabazz put us through, based upon the eventual future that will become of us. So we had to become stronger physically, because prior to the cleaving of the sun and the moon, or what's called the deportation of the sun and the moon, this is the creation of life now in a masculine perspective, in which we went from an all-moon phase to an from a stellar phase to a moon phase to a solar phase. But in the sphere and realm of galactic time, intergalactic time, it's only but a molecule, not even a milli. It's less than a percentage of Jay-Z's ownership in the net. You know what I'm saying? It's almost infinitesimal how big the history of our people is. But based upon our reluctancy to explore history as us being autochthon from here, we are not seeing the forest for the trees. Therefore, if we have to look at the preposition of us being an eternal people, that means there was some part in our history where that was shut down. You know what I'm saying? Yet when we speak of our history, we are speaking of ourselves as a global people, but a people who were, in a sense, caucused from the rest of Asiatic society for a certain amount of years. That's you and me that was born here, which is why they tell you that they came here after a certain time, and why they want to try to stick to that as the premise to make you think that you came over here with them. So what I'm also saying is that during the Emancipation Proclamation, if at the time you had a free national constitution that respected you, and most of the people being bagged up in this forgery were undeclared Moors, those of us that were declared had to be given a different designation, because we were still free nationals of the government, because we registered generally, which was supposed to be the second part of the emancipation for those people who were erroneously put into the bondage of slavery, based upon them being lumped into the color scheme that was then perpetrated by the states after they got to write down the legislatures on their own state books. It's a passage I want to read to you from a book on the subject that a noble blessed me with, and we can share with you. And it goes, before the close of 1856, the convention in President Johnson's so-called reconstructed states had given way to legislatures which proceeded to give ample evidence of the spirit that was in the South following the rebellion. The rebellion was the so-called Confederate War. But the Confederate War concerning you started in 1854. Amongst those states of the so-called Cherokee Confederacy that were out there trying to fight for a certain degree of their own freedom and the right to hold on to their slaves, meaning the enslaved peoples from the colonies and the plantations, as well as the denationalized Moors who were now falling into that. The English C lesson is a very important part and key in the history of building. That's why a lot of gods for the nation of gods and earth understood the mathematics of the slave thing on this almost supernatural level, and were able to convey that through how they built on the lessons. But the English C, the C in English C lesson represents the term, or what was called also in C, the CEE, in terms of A being Allah, B being born, C being SEE, or CEE, meaning to see. But it also represented the term beyond the sea, which represented the 1666 Sefton Creek Trust. That was an ecclesiastical trust initiated by Jesuits after the Civil War, and put into what we call the 14th Amendment. So that Holy See in the English Sea lesson also represents beyond the sea, because it also talks about the fact that your uncle did not know he was your uncle and was brought beyond the sea over 9,000 miles. And it was not possible for him to swim the 9,000 miles back, right, to be able to go back to the land of his forefathers. Now, 9 we know represents born, being brought into existence, and what was being brought into existence through this English Sea lesson was Moors being put beyond the sea in shallow graves under the codified term Hiram or Asar, and then hit in the head, and then had the acacia leaf placed on his grave. The acacia leaf is a symbol of the Milky Way galaxy. The grave represents the portal or the sarcophagus or the chariot. The body inside represents the soul, right, which everyone is agreeing to keep the secret and keep the sword above the mother of the sun. Therefore, he is in perpetual darkness. So the sea then also represents the Holy See, or the Vatican Holy See, of what's called the Open Friendly Secret Society of the Vatican. That it itself, again, is an open, friendly secret society that the Confederacy, or the president of the white Confederate government, Jefferson Davis, was trying to get the Pope at that time to recognize him. Therefore, this would be the papal ability to come in through the Confederacy and then lock everybody into a Catholic situation. So, as we go on, the spirit that was in the Old South, possibly plus the hatred and the animosities which the war had engendered, these legislatures were made up principally of the officers and rank and file of the Confederate Army. Now, remember that. Now, when we say the Confederate Army, we're supposed to be talking about who? We're talking about the people who are walking around with the Confederate flag on, right? Or at least that's supposed to be who we're referring to. that's so, let's investigate that. Are you Kituat? This is from an excerpt from the book Confederate Cherokee. Chaplain Reverend Lewis Downing of the 1st Cherokee Mounted Rifles awoke at the dawn of the new day on December 9, 1861. He stood amidst the officers of the Creek and Cherokee nations in what was to become the Kansas Indian Regiments of the Army of the United States of America. So these were all of the people who were still functioning under the auspices of the original United States. Among the warriors lie free Africans, meaning Moors, right? Maroons, meaning Moors, and fugitive slaves, meaning Caucasians, from the South, from the Deep South, Eurozoids, from the Deep South, hoping to move on to Kansas and freedom on the border. There were many battles yet to come, but for this morning, Chaplain Dowling felt safe. Across the cornfield lie what was left of the 1st Cherokee Mounted Rifles of the Army of the Confederate States of America, under the leadership of Colonel John Drew, that's Noble Drew Ali's father. Behind, who was a Cahokia Moor, married to a Washita, descendant of the Empress, named Eliza Turner. Behind Colonel Drew's men lie the secessionist troops, the secessionists. These were called the Rebs, made out of the ribs of the rebels. The secessionists were the so-called Caucasian aspects of the Confederacy, who were working under the jurisdiction of the lords or officers of the Confederacy, John Drew and these people, and were allowed to hold down anybody coming under the term Negro, based upon them being indentured servants or white people fighting for their own independence to be able to have their own states under this Moorish or black Confederate state. The secessionists of Albert Pike's Indian Brigades. This is why Albert Pike was so into Indians and all of that, but hated Negroes, because the Negroes were the ones who were undeclared off the rip and were just shipped down south and put under the beast of burden aspect and promised more gold for their labor than they received in their own country. But at the time that their country exists, they didn't have to work. They had all the labor. They had all the money in their estate. So the original estates, the E was taken off, and they just put state in your face. But what this also means is that Albert Pike was under direct. Albert Pike went on after the war and all of that to rewrite all of the Scottish Rite information. Why was he able to do that? And then injected all the Lucifer and Satan stuff in it. Because all the Lucifer and Satan stuff was the false door, blind that they was putting in to throw off the original white boys of the true history of the Moorish connection to the Scottish Rite rituals that Pike had basically ingested from being under the rank and file of the prophet's father. So when they talk to you about Indians, you always think of you're not thinking of them as a unified army. You're always thinking of them as a bunch of wild people running down with horses and spears and doing the woo woo and all of that. That's the Hollywood version of what was really going on. The unified troops and all of that you see the Union playing, that was really the black people playing that. The Wild West people, these were the outlaw white people that was running from these people and was pledging allegiance to certain factions of the original Confederacy under the white aspect of it. The same way you have black America and white America now, you had the same thing back then. So all of these banks and stuff that these people was robbing and all that back in the days was banks that was owned by your ancestors. That's why they was all out there. That's why they all had terms on it. Whenever you see Wild West towns, it was always like a general post. It was always something like that, because that is the function of those outward territories at that time that were having to defend themselves from the robbers and the vagrants that was coming in through people escaping the plantation and colonies after 1779. So you had including the 1st Choctaw Chickasaw Regiment and the Choctaw Battalion, the 1st Creek Regiment, and the 2nd Cherokee Mounted Rifles under Colonel Stan Waite. The other side, on the Confederate Army, lied Chaplain Dowling's home, his family, and the rest of the Cherokee Nation. So that shows you that Downing himself was a Cherokee. That means Downing is a Cherokee name. That means all of these people that they call about Cherokee, these is all the black people that was running shit. This is where people like Nat Love and Beckworth and Bass Reeves, and that's where these are where all these people come from. Mary Fletcher, Shotgun Mary, Stagecoach Mary, what's her name? All these black great outlaws, so-called outlaws. These was the Moors, the so-called freed slaves that was going and taking back everything that these people was encroaching on them from through the extension of Washington through the zip code. So those outward places that were still under our jurisdiction that wouldn't accept the zip codes, they would stick Jesse James and Billy the Kid and the rest of these people on these towns, these so-called black towns or Moorish towns. And then because they would be ran through, then if that didn't work, then they bring in the Klan. Then they burn down the towns and then rebuilt it, and now all those black people that get caught or whatever, they would then redesignate them, kidnap them, take their estate, and then sell them to somebody far away so that way they won't be able to come back in a true station. All of this developed amongst the Cherokees. Again, this is in this battle that we're talking about is 1861. It said that the missionaries didn't get to the Cherokee Nation until the middle of the 18th century. You understand? Through who? The Jesuits. It was Jesuit missionaries that came to the Cherokee between 1736 and 1743, and it was never going to happen. They had attempted to establish a kingdom of paradise amongst the Cherokee people. But to be welcome in this paradise essentially was only going to be those people who they said. So the Cherokees kicked them out, and they didn't mess with them again until the late 1800s. They were trying to, in a sense, after that, they were trying to create a situation where the Cherokee Nation was founded upon the notion of equality. But remember, the Cherokee and all of these different names started coming out of the aspect of those who were disinherited and their estates being taken away. So they had to use their tribal names now as their national names, because the eel and the bay and all of that was kind of now gone in that traditional sense. So there was no identifying factor to establish them as the original free inhabitants. Here we go. The message of equality based on the monogenetic theory of origins as preached by these early missionaries found ready acceptance among people who failed to distinguish themselves on the basis of race. All accounts of the so-called Native American record, no evidence that the Northern Indian made any distinction between Negro and white on basis of skin color. Do the knowledge to that. Now, if we know that the term American Indian up until the very late 1800s meant Moor, right? Original or Tonkin Moor, then they are saying that those so-called Indians looked at Negroes and white people as the same. You did? At least not in the early period when it was uninfluenced by the so-called white settlers. Among the people of the Chickamauga region, those who spoke the Kitui or the Kituan dialect, they were part of the original Kituwa Nighthawk Society, which was the original Freemasonry going all the way back to the kingdoms in the Grand Canyon and all of that. There was a particular ethnic openness, and the people were more receptive to racial diversity within their towns than the mainstream Cherokees. You see? And once the white people realized that, they started to graft themselves into the so-called families because now they was freeing them. Because now once the native Moor or the Algonquin Moor or the indigenous Moor marries or one of these so-called Europeans that's now emancipated, the European now comes out of their station, but the state of the Algonquin that's marrying them is now abandoned. So now nobody has an estate. Therefore, they both fall under the jurisdiction of these states. John Marin, a Moorish African minister, a so-called Moorish, we know he's Moorish, but we call him African minister, also brought his message of equality to the Cherokee and the Creek nations in the years preceding the Revolutionary War. Moran, converted by the preaching of George Whitefield, had fled to the Cherokee Nation after his family rejected him and his Christian mission to them. See that? He wasn't a Christian. Moran, he was a Moor who converted to Christianity, and his family rejected him because he rejected and abandoned his estate. Christianity was the religion of the emancipated slave. So when you adopted that, you became on the level of that, and thereby under the jurisdiction of the Holy See, which is running everything from behind the scenes. Living amongst the Cherokee Nation, he adopted the social and cultural patterns of the Cherokee. Moran's story of his life among the Cherokee is one of the enduring stories of the colonial history, and a critical text in so-called African-American literature. Moran went on to be a prominent member of the African-American community. There was no African-American community back then, so that means it had to be the Moorish community that was still Moorish that lived amongst the Cherokee. Right? Because the term African-American didn't exist back then. So, speaking of what it really is, served in the Revolutionary War and was one of the founding members of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, free and accepted Mason. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge is the founding. The free and accepted Masons are the white boys that they freed and let come into their family. These are the ones that went through the ritual of the Boston Tea Party to get the charter for African Lodge 459 that was on one of the boats in the harbor. So, which was, again, a militant nationalist abolitionist organization. See? Early members of Prince Hall were ministers Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. Absalom Jones was one of the original founders of the Methodist Church. His church and house and property and all of that is downtown right in Wall Street. You can go and see his crib and all of that right now. Go around Wall Street and ask him where Absalom Jones' crib is, where his plaque is. They'll show you. All of that was all black. All that was black Cherokee, who were the dominant because they were the inheritors of when the Algonquin split. They were the ones who kept it up because they were the Mohawks and the Mohegans within the Iroquois Confederacy, which represented the Braves. In the latter part of the 18th century, white colonists began to recognize, especially in areas of South Carolina and Georgia, where Moors and Indians outnumbered whites 4-1. A great need existed to make Indian, Moors, and Negroes a check, CHECQUE, upon each other, at least by their vastly superior numbers. We should be crushed by one another. So in that, they basically created a new civilization program, of which the United States government, which sought to change the economic base of Cherokee society by promoting a shift from subsistence-based agricultural system to a plantation system, where they would now get slaves and start to enslave one another. And this would allow the United States then to force those Cherokees, whose nations was flourishing still, even though the United States is now holding the Societas Republicae y Americanos Estados, meaning the Moroccan Society of Republican Estates, in trust, while at the same time allowing the remnants of that original empire that's now classified under the United States and General Congress Assembled, denying them the ability to reestablish themselves through the post, meaning establishing their own forms of communication outside of the United States without any United States participating or precipitating any type of interference of that mail. Of that mail matter. So what you're seeing then is after 1774, when the Moors basically declared their confederation then went into adjournment because we were divided as a people due to autochtons of our nation going against the national interests for their international interests by adopting foreign titles and letters of marque and trademarks while still annexing themselves with the Ile and the Bays over here. So a plan, if you will, was hatched through our protectorate confederation internationally, the Almoroccan Empire, to go and basically reestablish and reassess Europe. So the international ties that existed between us and our satellite kingdom or base in what is now North Africa, Morocco, we then went over there and fortified that and gathered up the core officer rank of everything were Moors who had Almohade or Almoravid blood that was linked to those Moors over here. And then they went over there and then got Musa, the so-called Arab, to procure soldiers from the actual region who descended from the Numidian side of stuff. And in that, they were all trained in Moorish, specifically, forms of warfare. And then this was the body that they took back up into Spain. That's why it seemed like Moors disappeared out of nowhere in Africa and then just started locking everything down in Europe. Because that was going to be the base now that we would use to travel back and forth. That's why it wasn't until they took Grenada that they was able to come and find South America. Because we were behind the Moors over there. That's why they were so powerful. That's why they were so immaculate. That's why their culture was adopted by the Turks and everybody else under them. Because they were the ones that were carrying the knowledge of ancient Egypt and ancient Rome, because ancient Egypt and ancient Rome was over here through the battles of the Punic Wars of Carthage, which ended up in evolving later into the Peloponnesian Wars, which then eventually led into the creation of the Roman, or what we call the Mediterranean states. All of which were the product of the Yakub situation that we would also refer to as Gilgamesh, or we would all refer to as Noah. Because in the story of Noah, it talks about the rain starting and the flood starting and him having to get in the beast 2 by 2. Every beast of every fowl. And they started naming all these animals. But remember, we are also a totemic society. So when we look at these animals as being listed, these animals can represent a myriad of different things, as well as not only the totemic aspect of the people that were going, but it can also represent the bestial nature or the de-evolved nature that was happening to the people at that time, being that they were participants in this experiment under this madman. And those that jumped ship and eventually went into the coastline areas of all of these, of what became the old continent of Pangaea, because now this has been after it's been broken up, they were the ones who went and formed these kingdoms. But over here, for whatever reason, this place, again, was the Garden of Eden, where the new people or the remnants of the old people conjoined to form what became the so-called Asiatic or so-called Asiatic race. That had two strains, the Eels, the Elohims, the Bays, the Yahweh. And as time passed throughout history or whatever, this so-called bloodline and nobility is passed down up until, let's say, the part of, like I said, the Yakub thing goes down, and then the 12-strain bloodline or 13-strain based upon the 12 or 13 signs of the zodiac in this sphere or realm of reality became the 12-strand of bloodlines that they were going to start to alter to bring about different races of people on the planet. All by those peoples forsworn in those areas through something that would eventually we would know as Freemasonry, as the ability to pass on the royal secret. All codified in a classified handbook of the United States called, I think it's called the Human Resource Manual, on how to turn people into devices and portals and all of this type of stuff. But this is all based upon the codified edifice of Hammurabi Bey, or the person we call Hammurabi Bey, and the Chaldees and the Elamites, people that we today call the Babylonians and the Sumerians. But when you look at BC being before them and AD being after them, then you look at things in the whole time. But we look at things as being almost like in a straight line, and it's not like that. Both of these time periods, as well as societies, are running concurrently with each other. There could be a society of all black, like in the Black Panther, a whole society of highly evolved black Africans somewhere. Nobody even knows. And these people so advanced, they don't even know about us. They just be on some whole other shit. But we like ants to them. Well, they would look at us as much as we know about Moors and all that, like, oh, this shit is downstairs. Y'all got to get up on this. But at least we got to get to the level to just be able to fathom the possibility of that. They've got people in such a racist slavocracy that this Confederate thing that they flipped on everybody started flipping backfire on them. So when we started to see that this was happening, those of us that was in the legislatures at that time started to promote and put things into works or legislation that would alter one group's ability to render their estates while giving other groups the ability to mimic them. So this principally was made up of officers of rank. I just showed you who the officers of rank in the Confederate Army were. And I ain't talking about no white people except for Albert Pike, and he was just a little captain in it. So the same way Washington and these people came up under all of these noble Moors like Ben Bay and Absalom Jones and the rest of these people, John Hanson and all of these Moors, the same way these white boys in the South, these KKK niggas and all of that came up under these great, if you will, Moors or whatever, who were either for or against slavery of the so-called white man or their own people. So the laws which they proceeded to enact were freighted with prejudice and overloaded with injustice for the emancipated race. The emancipated race were the so-called white people who were freed, just like they were freed on January 1st in Russia by Tsar Nichols. And then they started importing all of them over here as so-called indentured servants to build up more of the United States. But they were being moved and enslaved and all of that in the North. While in the South, especially in the West Indies, it was more about sugar and agriculture. So you got to get the people who know how to do that. The white people don't know how to do none of that. They only know how to do the rough stuff, the industrial stuff, and they became the backbone that they built the Industrial Revolution on. All of this money coming out of these Confederate banks that descend from the original Articles of Confederacy that was established by the original Great Seal Moors under Hanson Bay and Osiris Griffin Bay and the rest of them. The ones who put Washington in position as general over the Continental Army, meaning he had the ability to go to every post to pick up the mail for the Moor, meaning us, the government, and bring it back so that way we would understand how much of the empire was in peril, because that's what the post is for, to show that Babylon the Great is fallen, or how far your empire has extended or has ceased to extend. So by the permanent and peculiar vagrant laws, the system and fines that were proceeded to pave the way for a type of peonage, which contained most of the bad features of slavery and none of the good ones. The children of the ex-slaves were put into absolutely a mercy of the stronger race by a system of so-called apprentice laws, which established a relationship of master and servant and endowed the master with absolute control. Come up on his to the rest of them, to the stronger, and to the racial system of the apprentice laws, which established the relationship of the master and the servant. And this, from that point now, because the white boys who were now acting as the trustors over the original trust now could create laws to keep out, to not to control or first exterminate the so-called natives or free inhabitants, of whom were under that government, the Free National Constitution, under the Confederation, right? The Confederated or the Confederation government, that's basically all black. And under them is these white boys that they are gearing up and allowing to do business with the North white boys in their little Senate place, because they are of a certain class and a certain Mamluk bloodline that they've been breeding in and bringing over here since the times of Louis and Anna Maria. So now, though, what's happening is these same white boys now is now using their position to box free Moors out, meaning we can't control y'all. We don't have no jurisdiction over y'all, but we got jurisdiction over everybody else that's not in control of their true self. And those people now will, because they are pledged themselves to our labor, to do labor for us, we are going to now perpetuate that as their history. So when you come in contact with them, if you can't even relate to them, because they have been put under this new system that we're gearing up in our little community that is now extending itself by how much land we are able to appropriate, because you guys, government, you guys are warring with each other. So because you guys are warring with each other, we got to war with each other, but eventually we're going to come to a peace. And in that peace, we both going to agree, the North and the South white boy is going to agree that the North white boy is going to be able to represent the rest of the country and subdue the rest of the Moors. And this is when the true Indian War started. And the forced denationalization and chattelization of species Negro as property reached its height between the years of 1779 and 1854, which would be 75 years. But then if you go to 1865, that would be 85 years of chattel slavery, which laid the groundwork for the basis of the disinheritance of people based on national and racial position, due to the fact that the laws that these Cherokees and these original people started putting in their documents to keep the emancipated white people out of their jurisdiction, because they knew they were trying to flip them to adopt the slave ship to break up their agricultural business that was thriving internationally for them, because the white people didn't have no money like that. But the white people had to be provided for as under the premise of the United States of America, because they fought to have their own thing. And so this endowed with a man of absolute control over the miners and binding the Negro children to the soil. See, those laws were supplemented by the taxation for so-called blacks who possessed no tangible property because they owned nothing, because they were the estate. But because they were doing business in the form of European court, British court, without their national titles, they was now being able to be foreclosed on due to chicanery and swindling, which only helped to ensure their dependence, if not their servitude, because now they had to then go get jobs in the United States, because that was the only country that had a currency that was backed by the original money. The original Confederate money was now defunct. Nobody was using it, because it was like after we adjourned it, that's when the conflict started. After 1774, we declared what it was going to be for us, and then everybody got mad. And then between 1774, 1775, 1776, those 3 years, that's the Revolutionary War. Then by 1777, they get a loan. Actually, they get a loan in 1776, the end of 1776, from England, to show you that there's some crazy shit going on there. 21 loan that they had to pay back by 1778. They didn't have that. So we wasn't trying to back that in terms of their money. So they went bankrupt then. So in 1778. So do the knowledge to that. That's a bankruptcy nobody's talking about. But that bankruptcy made it possible for the other ones to succeed. You see what I'm saying? Because each bankruptcy was a different coup d'etat. It was a different play for power from a different faction that was trying to monopolize the fact that the government was in an emergency session. It had to adjourn itself. So because it had to adjourn itself, the only law that was agreed upon by both parties of the original agreement, both the British king and the Moroccan emperor, was the Cestui Trust that was set aside for the citizens of Britain and Morocco to receive their estates in case something happened to them. Their relatives could go over and either find somebody to assume the debt or claim the debt by assuming the estate, thereby becoming a planter and going back to the Confederation, especially by having your free national name. So on February 28th, which is again the last day of Black History Month, right? Last day of the first day of, let's say, Moorish New Year. Well, the only lunar month in their whole 365 Gregorian scheme. In 1778 through July 1782, the repayment of which had to be ratified by Congress on January 22nd under Capricorn, right? The United States Bank was created in 1791, but it was a private bank with 18,000 of the 25,000 shares owned by England. Therefore, it was a partnership between the Britannic Majesty and the Moors in the guise of the emperor, or subjects of the emperor, not to the emperor. But even being subject to the emperor is the same as being subject of an emperor when you are a true noble or at death. Therefore, no de jure constitutional Congress has existed since March 27, 1861. See? So after that last quorum where those original 7 states, Circle 7 states, walked out, that was it. That was the end of the original government. So what took place then was a sine die, which is Latin, which is like till we meet again, or adjourned, or executed. Yet we were against the whole agricultural thing that was being flipped on everybody, and also some of us against each other. So being that we were divided between 1774 and 1779 is when Washington and them made their play. And they set up the perpetual system that eventually led to the bondage of people by purposely calling out their name and putting on the state records what people would be called and what those designations would be certified as in their lexicon. And therefore they would always rule as the fake beneficiaries of the estate, while making the true beneficiaries the beast of burden, the position that they were in prior to all the confusion. So once everybody walked out, the first problem was the first bankruptcy, which they owed and they couldn't pay. And so by 1812, Britain came in and eventually burnt down the original record because there wasn't a specific post to position and protect the system then, because the whole system that was really built as a testing post for them to rule was now being used as a position of enmity against everyone else. Therefore, again, the English sea lesson where it says, my uncle does not know he is my uncle was brought over here by the trader over 379 years ago. This is going back from the time of 1666 to 1774. Excuse me, 1555 to 1774. Because in 1555, the first group of Moors came over here. Again, another group of Moors came over here again, who came directly from the expulsion of Granada, because this is where their ancient peoples came from. So they were the ones that was up here that the white man found here, Cortez and them and Estevanico and them found when they finally came up to Mississippi. They had already been here, and already mixed in with their ancestors that was already here. But there were different waves of people, and those waves brought about different perspectives of people. When you get a historic map, you'll see what was the historic map of the southwestern Pennsylvania. You'll see towns like Butler, Armstrong, Indiana, Cambria, Somerset, Westmoreland, you know what I'm saying? Then Washington, Greene, Beaver, Allegheny. All of these are Moorish or old Moorish cities under the Confederacy that were usurped after that period. And then the people who were the true descendants of the government put on the negative side of the estate, of which they were now unwittingly being chatteled into a system where they would always be on the outside of what is already theirs, because they are deemed as enemies of it or dependents of it or children of it, and not heirs of it or beneficiaries of it or any of that. That's why most people that's talking to you and talking about all this New World Order and all this other shit, all of that is outside of what I'm telling you. I'm telling you it's more basic than that. It's a primal thing at this point. It's something that is not modulated by what you want it to be. It is what it's going to be. And it is what it's always been. It's been people trying to disinherit you and get you to abandon your estate. That's why when you marry somebody through the state is the third party in the marriage. Because when the woman marries the man inherits her estate and the estate of the child in trust that is held by the third party, which is the state. That's why your check is the one that gets garnished, man, and nobody else, for kids that's not even yours sometimes, because you are the one who has the power over the estate, which is a trust. But that trust can't be that if you are civically dead. And you're dead civically based upon you abandoning your original estate. You did that in history by adopting the Jesuit-controlled Islam or the Jesuit-controlled Christianity that was given to your forefathers between the years of 1774 and 1854. And was then given to you, and then those of your ancestors was then thrust amongst those ancestors that knew what was up and knew what was going on and was conscious of the reality of it. And therefore, some of your ancestors were despised or despised those ancestors that they couldn't really understand what was they were trying to kick to them. So they believed the lie about themselves that they was brought over by the traitor 379 years ago and then put into the perpetual mental bondage that then could be used to denationalize further the nations that were now using tribal names to identify themselves as national names amongst the Articles of Confederation. But the Articles of Confederation was angled around those so-called Moorish states that were Moroccan in habit and nature, right? But Autochthon / European in terms of partnership, which is why you have a European name, because they fought to go back to the ways of the ancient forefathers of Europe. They didn't say of England specifically, which was the original Lord proprietors of the state, who were the original petitioners to become a part of the great republic that your great ancestors before them erected before they got here. They were running to get out of Europa based upon the tyranny that those old Moors was enforcing on them through the Grand Orient Templar line, through Hugh de Payan and Godfrey de Bouillon, through the so-called old Scottish Rite G7 line, coming through Charles V, which also unites Germany, right? And the so-called Morisco Spanish line coming through the De Medicis, the so-called Borgias, and the rest of these people. The habit of Europe was to use the amalgamated Mamluk slaves that was imported through the Turks, through the Caspian, through the Black Sea, into the Caucasus, and then out through the Caucasus up into Grenada, and were then refined and then put forth into the Janissary system that was going down in Egypt under the Caliph of the Abbasid, whose secret Caliph also ruled at the Old Man of the Mountain in what is now Iran, that they used to call Persia. And those white boys in the Templar system, which was French, which was connected to the Merovingian Charlemagne system, which links up the Holy Roman Empire with the Moorish Empire at the Battle of Tours in, I think, 926, which then brings all of the so-called Sangreal, original bloodline of Moors over here, which represented the traditional Moors of the original Almoravid dynasty, whose top brass was basically genetically connected to Moors over here, or were Moors from over here, who went over there to build up an army of indigenous Moors of that continent, and then brought them up into Europa, and then regenerated the bloodline for the next 900 years. So the reason why it don't make sense how they talk to you about it, because they don't put the unifying factor of the behind-the-scenes stuff that they have married or amalgamated into, and now turned it all into a conspiracy money thing. But it's really a manipulation of God's flock thing. It's really a let's see how far we can push the physical limits of God thing. It's about how we can defame and destroy the evidence of spirituality in the human condition thing. That's what's really going on. So the reptilian aspect, which is really an exacerbated aspect of the mind of the individual, is really just a clinical reduction of matter that has become stagnant, because reptiles don't change. They don't evolve. What their form is, that's it. So whatever level they are, that's the level they are. There's nothing pumping in them to become more than what that is. That's why animals that stand up are seen as majestic or regal, or having a degree of consciousness higher than most, like hares with witches or black cats, things like that. These are all totems that were reminiscent of the phase of, or age of magic, or the magi, that kind of coalesced or culminated with the birth of who they call Yehoshua, the Christ, who was the forefather of the traditional Moors, being that he was the first one to declare his nationality to Rome. And Rome backed off. It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the people representing the people, that got the Romans to do all of that. The Romans and the Carthaginians is basically the same people. And they just represent what you would say the Almoroccan Moors and the Barbary Moors. You know what I mean? Some of them live more like there was different levels of what they call pirates, you know. It was the musketeers, you know, those was the ones with the guns. These was with the gunpowder with the Moors started and all of that. They was the ones perfecting the muskets through the blacksmiths. Then it was the buccaneers. They're like the ones that's like swinging from the rafters of the ship and all of that, and doing an intrigue like the spies. Then there's the corsairs. They're the ones that's nobles from noble houses that's posing as pirates to see what the deal is. You know what I mean? And to get some experience under their belt, so if they go to war, they know how to fight and all that. Then you got the buccaneers, musketeers, and I think that's it. Buccaneers, musketeers, corsairs, and privateers. The privateers were the ones that were under the letters of marque, who were out to kidnap and trademark Watonkin specifically, and either bring them back to a certain kingdom or palace to be bred into that family, and or teach their family something or whatever, or just sold into slavery to take their estate as the trustee, saying that they've abandoned it. That's why the prophet is all wise. That's why niggas will say whatever they want about the man, yo. Just say whatever they want. But I ain't seen nobody that established a trust for you and an estate for you that works really in harmony with things when you understand it in a harmonious manner and not look at it like somebody trying to stop you. The only person trying to stop you may be yourself from getting free, or as free as you can physically be, because that's the real purpose of what you're doing. The real purpose is to physically go through a process of freeing yourself physically based upon a spiritual precept. That is evidence of heaven, of unifying heaven and earth, because this is deeper than religion for you. This is you reclaiming an aspect of yourself that has been hidden within a 400-year period. But you believe that 400 years is really 400 years, when really it's 4 different 100-year time periods that were used to break down your perception of time. So that when you hear BC, you think thousands of years ago. But BC just means the time in which your people was ruled. You know? So when you say 836 BC to 1196 BC is really 1416 AD to 1776 AD. You see why there's nobody in these ancient pyramids and things like that no more. Because there was whole societies and people who lived there who were then denationalized, declassified, and due to war habits left. And then other people came in and blew shit up, made the shit look older. That's what they did to the museum in London. That shit ain't that old. But this is the aspect, again, of more science, or science in general, that deals with the ethnological origin of things that create the dependency. These are essentially all, but these positions that I named, the corsair, the privateer, the buccaneer, and all of that, these are the levels today that you would call CEO. A corporate is core pirate, prime pirate. Understand? It's core pirate. It's not really corporate. It's a core of pirates. That's why they call themselves sharks. International business is dealing with the world. So if you're going to deal with the world, you deal with it through the position that was given to you to deal with it through. At least with the Prophet, he created the Moor Science Temple as a vast estate trust for you to be able to be shielded from a lot of the meanderings that they create. But again, the war of attrition that's going on in the so-called community is evidence of that. Because when I say the Moorish community, I'm talking about anybody melanated. But a lot of Moors are only talking about people who wear turbans and feathers. You see, so whether you are declared a Moor or not, it doesn't matter to me. I know what the Spirit has shown me, and the Spirit has shown me that Moors are what you would call black people. So if that's what it is, that's what it is. But if you call me, let's say, black and regular speak, I understand what that means. But when it comes to any type of commerce or usury, which I don't deal with, then, you know what I mean, I got to deal in the proper person, you see, because this is the position that they have created in this society. That's why they call it a free country, because so long as you adopt a different name, you're free to do whatever you want. If you hold on to your true self, then no, you can't really, they can't really interface with you anymore, because you are the real individual. So you have to decree anything that is beneficial or should be beneficial to the temple, which is you, which also is an estate, which is beneficial, which is also beneficiary of a trust. And these things are international based upon your relationship to the original family of nations. But I'm not talking about the one they talk about. I'm talking about the original one going back to God. The original family nation are the Bays and the Eels, Yahweh and Elohim, because those were the ones who incarnated into the Koresh tribe of the triple stage darkness, or out of the triple stage darkness, what we call, condensed into what we call the Koresh. The core, again, Koresh tribe of Shabazz, that manifests into physical flesh. And then after a certain amount of time, these Asiatics bring forth a humongous civilization on a higher density. that after the great cataclysm, meaning the great disposition between those two things, which we would understand as the separation of the black and the brown gene, this led to the fall of the society down through the matrix into what we call third density, or matter, which then materializes as darkness for X amount of million years until the moon is cleaved, and so we get night and day, which brings in the creation of physical matter in the form of woman and man, who then out of herself produces that which is unlike herself to ignite herself, and vice versa. Therefore, within the one there was always two, but within those two, but after those two, will always strive to become one. And out of those two that become one comes another one, and so forth and so on. That's the original tree. That's the original family of nations that you are part of. The family of nations that these people on earth is talking about is the traditional family nations that came out of the Societas Republicae Germanicanos Estados, which then gave birth to the Almoracan Empire, which then gave birth to the Union of the Six Nations, which then gave birth to the Iroquois Confederacy, which then gave birth to the United States of America and General Congress Assembled, which then gave birth to the Confederation, which then gave birth to the United States of America and General Congress Assembled, then which gave birth to the Continental Congress, then gave birth to the U.S. Congress, where you at right now. So these people are just inheriting things and trying to keep things slanted on a racial line based upon an oath and obligation that they have taken to do so. When you are functioning in the capacity of a Negro, something they own. That's just how it is. You see what I'm saying? They're not gonna really mess with you in a certain way based upon how much, like, knowing, like, people who listen to the show will know. You don't, since you've been listening to the show, have you really been going, like, heavily through it to the point where it was like before? Probably not. Because, if anything, I want people to understand that you're not supposed to take certain things so seriously where you sacrificing your own peace of mind and sanity to help someone else come and get something right. You got to take time, which I'm learning, which the Queen teaches me. Take time and preserve what it is you're doing for self, because this is what it's about. Because the only way you're going to help somebody is to have something substantial to help them with. But most people are functioning from a core pirate position and have set themselves up to inherit the work of their forefathers, who were the ones who originally chose to go against the thing in the first place. See what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to become a Moor. I'm not saying I'm a Moor because I'm trying to come out here and defraud somebody. It says me being a Moor has nothing to do with anybody else. That's who I am. But that has a lot of hats. That means I'm an emissary, a consul, an envoy, a sheik, you know, a high priest, you know, a noble, a gentleman, you know, a mason, not necessarily by initiation, but by craft, meaning you understand the levels of what that really means. You know, father, artist, Renaissance, you wear a lot of different hats. Because that's the point of becoming you're the one evolving into this noble position that you've always this noble position that you've always had, that you just becoming aware of. So you got to understand the reason why Noble Drew Ali told you not to get rid of your Bibles and why you can't let these tools get you crazy, and why the Jesuit-controlled aspect of the religion of Islam has been tainted to meant you believe that, Islam began with the Prophet Muhammad and all of that, then, like, all of that is true when you understand the true symbology of the story, but you can't take it to such a degree that you're ready to, go murder somebody and stuff like that because you have put yourself in a spiritual fauna. That's the difference between a Muslim and a Muslim. You a Muslim. You a Mohammedan, which means that you could read the Bible. You could read the Quran. All of them people. Look it up. Jefferson, Madison, all these people had Qurans, man, in the 1700s. What some white boy in this country was doing with a Quran when he's supposed to be a Christian? You never hear Thomas Jefferson talk about any of that. These people was following Moorish law. These people was going to school over here to figure out how to be able to run a country one day. And the time came where they was actually able to do it based upon us neglecting our estates and abandoning them for hooking up with what George was offering. So the prophet told you not to get rid of the Bible because the Bible is scripture is a trust and a state law, man. That's what that really is. That's what you're really reading about. You're really reading about the functioning bloodline and how estates in the old world were broken up and who inherited them and where you fit in and all of that. They can't tell you that you're not a descendant from the tribe of Ben Ishmael. They can't tell you that. That's why they want you to get blood tests all of a sudden. You know how the old war chiefs, medicine chiefs would test your blood to see what tribe you really came from? They would get a bowl and tell you to wash it. Then they'd have you drink this thing, and then you go and you spit in the bowl. And then based on that, they tell you, okay, well, this is from here, this is from here, you from here, you from here. How they did that, I don't know. But if they was doing that for over 2,000 years, you think that was somehow fake? That they somehow was making that up? You think over 2,000 years somebody would say, you know what, you bullshit, that's not real. How we know about it? But again, we don't know about it. We don't know about none of this. Most of us don't know about none of this stuff. And that's what I'm trying to say. That's how relevant this society has become. And it only took 85 years. That's why Elijah Muhammad referred to it in his wisdom as the 85% dumb, deaf, and blind. Those generations that came up under that 85 years of chattel slavery that they enforced on original Asiatics of this country by dissociating them from their bodies as chattel slavery and making them think that they were slaves from a place called Africa, which they were inventing in the old dark world, and they had done so up until the time of the Mahdi states, when the Mahdi came and shut down the whole British thing, which then forced the British to reorganize the entire empire and start freeing up the colonies and started making treaties with the Moors because that's the only thing that stopped them from messing with the Mahdi, was that they went and got a treaty from the Moors, specifically of the Rif. But a white man, he ain't going to really get into that. He ain't going to get into the Articles of Confederation because he didn't have no power under that. That's why they shy away from that. That's why they try to make you adopt the American version of who you are. Because the pre-government version is you. That's why you the enemy in this government. And the white people that they brought over here are not citizens of this country. Therefore, they're naturalized. But naturalized means that their birth certificate does not contain or is not a part of any estate. That's why they can intern them and do the things that they do to them. They want to be able to take all your money and tax you to death and all of that, but not give you any compensation for it and not put you in any position to benefit, like what they was doing with Puerto Rico. Yet this is precipitated and is allowed because a lot of darker-skinned original people hate each other and don't promote love amongst each other on a so-called racial lineal identity. They come here and get quote-unquote American, but it's not American they're becoming. they're becoming United States citizens. Citizen of the United States is a minor, a ward, a person, which is an instrument, something not necessarily alive or dead, something in a state of flux to be operated and managed. And people who get into law enforcement understand that. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in law enforcement is evil. You understand? I'm saying that the system itself that they are part of is so corrupt at this point. The only people who could turn it around probably is them. But in my opinion, by the time that they figure that out for themselves, meaning those law enforcement officials and officers in it, this government, their government, the United States, if you will already have sent in foreign people to take them out anyway, like you see in the movie The Terminator. When he came in and shot up the police precinct, or like they did in the Midwest when they brought their black helicopters in and was shooting up that police station. Called it a drill. Like the same drill that was running concurrently at drill to contain and protect an explosion at the same time the Boston Massacre when an explosion went down, uncontained. So, like I said, you can't be upset by what the colorable country does if you are colorable as well. You see? And so, in striving to become directly responsible for oneself, it is paramount that one understands the necessity when dealing with international aspirations, how international integrity goes a long way, meaning representing who you are in a positive way no matter where you're at, regardless of how disgraceful somebody becomes, to maintain a degree of decorum that elevates and transcends you out of that area. So certain things that people are doing who call themselves Moors are not things that they need to do to be Moors. The more you struggle for recognition, the more you will not be recognized. The more you establish recognition, the more recognition and establishment you get. The more you have, the less you own. The less you own, the more you have. This is the true premise of emancipation, to transfer the ownership from one position into the next in a seemingly fashionless way that has a harsh beginning but an overall acceptance. So someone can act like and say that, I'm fooling myself, or I'm crazy, or, what you got that, thing on your head for, or whatever, or laugh, or whatever they want to do. That just shows the level of the ignorance of the person that's around. Because ain't no white man laugh yet. You know what I'm saying? Ain't no white man, no white woman laugh yet. It's the exact opposite. So those people who smirk or have smirked or whatever, to me or anybody else that's Moroccan in habit and things like that, that's what they're supposed to do, because that's them identifying themselves to me and mine. And that's okay. And therefore, because that's okay, I have the position or predisposition to allow myself to, function under the capacity of who I am as a national, not a citizen of the United States, but a U.S. citizen, which is really a U.S. national, who has il and they at the end of their name. For 3 little letters, you figure it wouldn't be much of a problem, right? Nope. So obviously there's something else with it. And if anybody wants to call in, you can call in at 347-637-1184. So like I said, we're all in a position of learning and allowing the sins of the past to finally be buried by acknowledging who and what we are now. And by not getting caught up in what people want you to perceive as yourself. If you hate niggas, then hate niggas because you hate niggas. Because you hate niggas. You know what I'm saying? Not because you think you're supposed to hate niggas because you white or you African or you black or you whatever you are. If you hate white people, then hate white people because that's what you want to do. That's what you feel you want to do, that you're going to hate anybody who calls themselves white. Then do that if that's what you're going to do. But do that because that's what you have done based upon research of it and full understanding of what it is you're partaking. Don't do it because you've seen the Panthers do it, or you've seen this people do it, or you've seen what cops have done to black people or whatever. If you're going to be a cop and all of that, then really do that. But really understand what you're doing. And don't play no games with it. If you're going to do it, then go all the way. Because you're not, unless you wanted to help people on the low, because that's all you can really do. I don't expect anybody that's a police officer to do anything. That's why when they do, I'm so amazed to help anyone. You understand? Because that's not the artifice that office was created for. That was based upon the racism that was perpetuated on Irish people, and that the Irish people originally felt that they had to adjust upon the so-called black people that were free at the time but who lived in the tenements along with them, to show the regular Protestant white people that they were running, that they could do shit. And in that, they were able to flood the police system and then use that to create, through the corruption of Tammany Hall, to erect the corrupt New York politics that's had Doomberg in there for so long. Morocco is wherever you are as a Moor. The place they call Morocco is the exotic creation of a cosmopolitan society that was created over 10,000 years. That culminated into now the Kingdom of Morocco that is under the protection of Prince Rashid. Allah protect him. Excuse me, His Majesty Prince Rashid. So the position that we are supposed to be in is the position of being able to encounter the noble on an equal basis. And we can do that if we establish ourselves in the perspective of who and what we are as individuals. So tonight you've seen, and we've built on how John Morant and all of these Moors, people, the original Confederacy, that were the descendants of the original Confederacy, of the Articles of Confederation, that were conjoined with the Iroquois Confederacy, that came out of the Six Nations, that was the homogeneous product of our original society, Republic Day, the Americanos Estados. So we, as that original people, have the responsibility to access that by declaring who we are, generally, and annexing that with our pre-national concept, which then unifies us between a position of heaven and earth. That is a balanced position that does not require heavy, extensive statutory legislation that you have to decipher and find the loopholes of. This is plain law on its face, prima facie. Therefore, it requires no altered tongue to perceive it when it is put forth in a manner that is either by request or, I wouldn't say demand, but direct aptitude, which is a correspondence and a maxim of law that is perpetuated amongst people in every culture, on every level. There's a certain code that even gangs, especially gangs, have, that people take seriously, that other people think are absurd, but they're still functional in the perception of someone's culture. And that culture is real for the people that's banging in that. So on Malcolm X's birthday, which was also, I think, the night that Jackie Kennedy wound up being out, which was on the anniversary of his birthday or death or one or the other. This is a poignant time for us to begin to analyze what our community or what type of world or culture you want your children and society to have after you. Do you want it to be one where it is chaos out of order or order into chaos? We are now in an order into chaos society. Therefore, the society to come after will be a chaos to order. In that chaos to order, there has to be some sort of presence for people to establish themselves, to understand who and what they were or are. What these people want is to create a system where everybody is totally bombed out and destituted and wiped out of any real rebellious quality, and then build a society of clones from that. The people who want to do this are the so-called Luciferians and whoever within that society. But then that whole society group, there's another group within that group within that group. People talk about whoever adapts to have read the Red Book, you will see that there's a section that talks about the seven masters. which corresponds to the 7 elders spoken about by Madame Blavatsky, as well as Dr. Pascal Beverly Randolph Bay. And in that, the Mahatma that she was talking about, or the secret chief that she was talking about, was the Moorish Science Temple and the Moors of it in the Hindu fashion. And these so-called Hindus and Moors, the free Indians who were exempt from everything, were the ones that were apart and seen as different from everybody else. So this new society of Americana that they were creating was created through 1865 to the end of Reconstruction by 1871. So by 1880, everybody had been under this new assumption of the Negro that had already been functioning from 1865. And those towns and everything came under the jurisdiction of the United States. Those general posts shut down, and the U.S. Post Office was set up. So it behooves us all to obtain our true person without doing all of these hoop tricks that these people is throwing in everybody's face as the reality to do it. The simplest path between 2 points is a straight line. But if a straight line is not apparent, a wormhole must be created. The only people who can create the wormholes are the people who have the substance of the star particles within them to do that. That's the people who come from the direct line of the 2 clans that then were broken up into 12 tribes and were then altered genetically. Isn't that what they're doing to you now, altering you genetically, giving you food that ain't real, putting hair in your head that's not real, putting things on your face that's not natural? Don't they got you doing all of that now? You altering yourself to appear more less of who and what you are. Yet, yes, you are Kenite. Yes, you are Rasta. Yet all of those have to be nationalized in a manner that's consistent with something that has existed from time immemorial, that's already set down to do that. That's why the United States could do all the crazy shit it's doing. Because it's doing it on behalf of America. America is a Mexim, a.k.a. Africa, conjoined into a mythic history that has been adopted as a reconstructional history given to us by 2 men, one of which had a black mistress who was the descendant of Alexander Hamilton. That's Thaddeus Stevens, played by Tommy Lee Jones in the movie Lincoln. So this is what I'm saying about how history has replayed itself to you, and now what I'm striving to do in my work specifically is to lay it out to you in a manner that is sensible and that you can verify for yourself based upon what's going on. I've already told you, if you compare the date now, if 1776 to them was 1196 to you, with that you can make a comparison date chart of what time it is in your calendar it is right now. That already takes you out of this jurisdiction now of their time space and then puts you back into a system again of what time it really is for you and your ancient people, the ancient Moroccans, the ones who allowed the establishment of those places called Moroccans and those eventual people who became Moors there, called Moors. That's why the Moors were able to do so much, because you had the influx of Moors coming from the ancient Moabite line that were now under the name of Dogon or Hausa or Tuareg or Amazigh or Marabut or Songhay or whatever. Garamant, Numidian, Carthaginian, Phoenician, Etruscan, Minoan, Corinthian, Dorian, you know what I'm saying, who eventually became Hessian, Danes, Huguenots, Cathars, Albigensians, Duns, Douglases, who became Douglases in America. This is who Frederick Douglass descends from, the Douglases, through Kenneth Douglas of the original Pictish people. So there's this whole world history that you have as an ancient Moroccan, which is a Moor, which is an Asiatic, which is a free national, which is in their language an American Indian. You know what I'm saying? That transcends these modern boundaries of what these things are. And when you really know that, you can understand and operate in a fashion that's comparative to that, where you can alter to a degree at least the way you deal with things, which then alters the way things deal with you. And you just don't inherit certain things because most people just not going to want to deal with you. And if you're a social type person or whatever, you should really take that into consideration and really understand what it means to then do things with your time that benefit all humanity in a manner which you no longer have to work to be paid, because now you are doing the work of the people. And the people can then, who are in earnest striving to do things correctly, can support you in the process of that. That is a practice that is older than everything. The white man made a movie about it called Pay It Forward. But essentially, it's the ability to harness positive energy and redirect through jurisprudence, which Kemites will refer to as Ma'at. And Ma'at calls for balance of oneself, which is understanding what one's nature really is. If you're a dirty Moor and a barbarous Moor, then at least be the type of barbarous Moor like these CEOs who be heartless and destroy people's lives or corporations, but then at the end of their life give everything up for free, or whenever they create everything, they give back in some way. Do something good, because not everybody is meant to be that. And the eventual storm of people's perceptions of you becomes sometimes what people want to become. Look what happened to Tupac. He had either had to die or fake his death to get out of people's perception of him. And they still altering it. You don't even remember what it was like to listen to Tupac really for the first time. And even if you do, it's not, when you listen to it now, it's more of a nostalgia of the time that this took place. Unless, I guess, he was a real heavy Tupac diehard fan, which some people are, which then is not good, because then that's idol worship. And you don't want to do that to any one man or any one thing. So even in understanding how the prophet and what the prophet is and has done and brought forth for all of us, he is not someone who I would particularly worship, because in the end he was still a man. Yet he was such a great man that whatever his shortcomings, at least up to my knowledge, have not been such that have been proven to me have been irrefutable or have been not some sort of coercion to make them look a certain way, which is what happens to most people who try to do something good and don't necessarily ask that much for it. So you got to protect your modern day people bringing it to you. That's why we want to give love to Brother Bobby Hemmett and give thanks and praise to him for all the work, you know what I mean, that he's continued to do for all of these times, and all of the greats who have come before us and brought forth the message. Khalid, Coakley, C. Freeman L., Myra Shearer L., Khalid Muhammad, wow, so many, man. Even the rappers, you know, some of the people they will speak about, like Freaky Ty and Big L, these type of people, and even the people in our modern day time. Brother, we just lost the heir to the throne of Islam in America, who is Malcolm X's great grandson, and we want to give thanks and praise to him as an ancestor on the other side. And anybody, again, who wants to holler, please do so at houseofl@hotmail.com. Thank you for those people who have been sending me images of you holding the Dark Scope 418. Thank you. We're going to put that up so people can check it. Not only as advertisement, but as a thank you, you know what I'm saying, for the support of the work and what it's hopefully doing. Anybody wants to check that out, go to www.darkscope418.com. You could also go to www.aseer.com. Check out some of the older material we have and some of the new stuff, as well as www.cookingmorewithless.com. If you want to leave a donation through PayPal, you can do so through dukeoftears@gmail.com. That's dukeoftiers@gmail.com. And also check out www.sagaasad.com. Also, we want to give thanks and praise again to the ancestors and anybody that has anything, they want to build on in terms of nationality, things like that. Definitely hit me up. Please be patient because it's only two of us going through everything. So we definitely want to strive to get back to you sooner than later. And love and light to everyone. We want to give thanks and praise to the ancestors as well as the prophet, as well as all of the Moors, conscious as well as unconscious. May they see the light. May we get what's right and inherit the day and the night. You know what I mean? So with that, peace, love and light. Holler at me, houseofl@hotmail.com. Till next moon day. Peace.